Um, Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm pleased to welcome you to this data collection webinar. This is the seventh in the series of the 2024 edition of the webinar. This is organized by the Data Collection Unit at UNICEF headquarters in New York. And I'm Attila Hanjoğlu. I'm the chief of the Data Collection Unit and the global coordinator of the MIX program. This 2024 edition of the series focuses on the multiple indicator cluster survey program, the MIX program. We are covering different aspects of MIX implementation, methodological work, work at the country level, tools and features of the tools that are used in the program. And we are having these webinars about every 2 weeks on Wednesdays from 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Today's webinar is entitled Assessing Data Quality During Fieldwork Before It's Too Late. And before we go into the presentation itself, some housekeeping rules. As usual, we have scheduled about 1 hour and 30 minutes, including Q&A. Throughout the webinar, please remain muted. Kindly write your questions in the Q&A box. We will try and group your questions and direct them to Pierre during the Q&A session. The webinar is being recorded, and it will be available on the MIX YouTube channel, together with the past webinars. This recording will also be available on the UNICEF SharePoint site, in case you have access to that. You can find the links to both of these in the announcement that you received earlier. So today's webinar, Assessing Data Quality During Fieldwork Before It Is Too Late, is going to be presented by Pierre Martel, who is a senior household survey expert working with the MIX program. Now, due to potential internet connection issues, we have pre-recorded Pierre's presentation, which I will show now. But Pierre is here with us and will hopefully be able to respond to your questions during the Q&A session after the presentation. So let me share my screen and start the video.
Good day, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. Today, we are going to talk about assessing data quality during fieldwork. Before it is too late. So, of course, assessing data quality during fieldwork has always been a very important and key component of any household survey program. And there are some standard and long-established methods, approaches that have been applied and that are continuing to be applied. Of course, I will be talking mostly in the context of MIX, but it applies to many other survey programs. So among the standard approach, of course, we have teams in the field. They have supervisors. So these supervisors have the role to observe the interviews, to do some spot checks, and to review the questionnaires. This is a very old established practice that is very important, of course. And we have particularly in the MIX field check tables, what we call field check tables, which are tables that are produced usually on a weekly basis. And they provide information on some key variables and indicators. And those are analyzed by the team usually at central level, and they are fed back to the team in the field to try to handle some of the issues that may be coming up during the field work. And then also another very well-established practice is that you have a central level supervisors, usually from the national statistic offices themselves. And they will do visits now to the field, to the teams, usually already with having looked at the field check tables and any other tools they may have at their disposal to visit the team and see how it's going and to bring up some of the issues that have been detected. In more recent years, there have been also newer tools that have been developed, although the older ones are still very continue to be used. So with the introduction of CAPI, which is the computer-assisted personal interviews, isn't it, on tablets, basically. So this allows to integrate into the CAPI application warnings and consistency checks. So we used to have in the older days of paper questionnaires, interviewers will make mistakes in skipping, isn't it, in following the proper skips of the questionnaire. But with the use of tablets, this is not a problem anymore. I'm not trying to say that CAPI has solved all problems. Of course, it has not. It has its own types of issues that we must keep an eye on, but it's not what I'm going to talk about today. And we have also, in more recent years, tools that are graphic tools, basically, that helps us look at the data while the teams are in the field. Nowadays, we use Power BI in the mix, and I'll give you some example right after. So it shows by graphs data that usually we would have looked through tables. And something also we have developed in the mix is another graphic tool, which shows us the weekly performance of interviewers within teams for key variables and indicators. And I will also show some examples. So this is an example of a field check table. They used to be in mix 6. I'm not entirely sure in mix 7, but in mix is like almost 40 of them. This example here is about seeing the proportion of immunization cards that have been seen by the interviewers to recopy the data, isn't it, of the immunization of the child. So as you see, the first line is the total for all the teams. Then you have line statistic by teams. And you have a column at the right that you can set up a target. And if the target is not reached, it will show as it is doing here. You can see here the target must have been 90%, and those that are below 90% are showing in that list. So these are the field check tables. And this is an example of a dashboard for the Power BI. So it's basically similar in some ways to what the field check table show, but in a graphical form, which is really more user-friendly. Here it shows the distribution of the age, isn't it, in the interviewed population by sex, and then you have the population pyramid on the right. And if you look at the top right, you can see this graph for urban only or rural only, or you can see for some specific months of the survey. So it's quite flexible. On the left, you see that various options, isn't it? Like response rates, average duration, heaping in outro, etc. Let me show you another example of Power BI. You see this is actually already like an indicator that is calculated, of course, on weighted, in this case, fertility rates. But it already gives a sense during the fieldwork if the data looks right, basically, isn't it? So that is very extremely useful, of course. I'm showing you now another example. I think this has been used mostly in the mix. I'm not sure about other survey programs. We have developed an interface to show a graphical representation of interviewers' performance within teams by week of fieldwork. Because when we look, like the previous tool we were just showing now, they mostly show us most of the time, although they can be adjusted, it's the aggregate data to date, isn't it, during the field work. But sometimes it's good to see the dynamic that's happening in the teams week after week. So just a short explanation, and then I'll show you an example. So these are scatter graphs, basically. Each graph represents the work of a single interviewer to date with respect to a given indicator or a given question. each dot of that graph represents 1 week of work, and you will see there's a small number below the dot that shows the sample size for that week, for that interviewer. So we can get a sense if the result that we see is based on how many cases, isn't it? So the idea here is that since interviewers move together as a team, difference between interviewers on the same team usually point at differences in interviewers' performance, which we refer to as interviewers' bias. Of course, if you think there are many indicators, for example, access to electricity, which will vary a lot depending on the area you are surveying, your urban, rural, or other areas. So if you see difference between interviewers or between teams, you may attribute them to the fact that they are not working in the same environment. But here, when you look at within teams, they are working in the same environment. So any big difference we see between them, most of the time, although not always, it can be attributed to something that come from the interviewers themselves. Let's see an example. So this is one example, shows the median time to complete an under 5 questionnaire in minutes, okay? So this is just a few teams. You have team here, 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 8. And each team has 5 interviewers. As you can see, the red line shows the red rectangles basically are the content of for a team. So we see, for example, just having a look at this, we can see that in the beginning of the fieldwork, many interviewers take more time to complete the questionnaire, which is expected because they're still getting the feel of it, isn't it? And then with time, in the first few weeks, we can see, as it's clear on the graph here, that the time becomes less, isn't it? Which is normal, and they reach a certain cruise speed, if we can say, about 3-4 weeks into field work. But at some point, some interviewers may be speeding really too much. So let me show you a case. You see the red arrow, I believe. You can see that this interviewer, 84, has really, the dots are very low in the scale, isn't it? It means the time is very short. Let me give you a blow up of that picture. So you see the green line shows 9. That is the average time that the interviewers have been doing in that survey on the 5 questionnaires is 9 minutes since the beginning of the survey. But you see this interviewer now in the last 2 weeks, we can see a bit difficult to read, but 55 and 49 cases in the last 2 weeks, over 100 questionnaire, under 5 questionnaires that one interviewer has completed, which is already quite a feat, isn't it? That large number of questionnaires. And the average time for that interviewer to complete an under 5 questionnaires in the last 2 weeks is about 3 minutes. So that is really very fast, and we have to be worried about that, right? So these graphs shows us the dynamics. If you were to round up everything, it would be more difficult to see, but because we see week by week, we can capture this kind of information, very useful. And here, that's another example for proportion of under 5 deaths in the birth history, which of course is a very important to measure for indicator of child mortality rates, isn't it? Under 5 mortality, infant mortality, etc. So I'm showing you now with the arrow interviewer 153 and 154 for that matter. For the first like 6 weeks of fieldwork, they practically either of them captured practically no under 5 death, maybe 1 in each case. And if you look around two other interviewers, 152, 100, for example, they have captured death. So it's not that there are no children dying in that area. So let me give you a blow up of that also. So after the 6th week, there was a targeted monitoring visit. When I say targeted, it means that the supervisor went from central level to visit that team, knowing that we had seen this issue in the data and where we were being worried that maybe they are not capturing well enough the under 5 deaths. And you can see after the monitoring visit, this interview 153 has started to now to actually record under 5 deaths at a level that is seems to be corresponding to what others have found in the country, basically. But if you look also a little further to the right, interviewer 155, which also was influenced by this monitoring visit, it seems that there was probably overcompensation, isn't it? Now, how can you invent that? So maybe you are going to say, but it's possible. In this case, I don't have the details that the interviewers, because of the urge that there was that they should be recording the under 5 deaths as they are, might have started to record the deaths of children, children who died just before delivery, for example, isn't it? So which is not, we are not supposed to record those. So it's a possible explanation, but it goes to show that when we use these tools for data quality control during fieldwork, there's always this worry that we will provoke a reaction that is not the desired one. We may emphasize a point and the interviewers may become so impressed by the emphasis that they are going to the other extreme. We have seen that a lot, for example, in anthropometry, when the interviewers are, the measurers are heaping on certain digits, and then when you tell them about that, they start avoiding the zeros and the 0.0 and 0.5. So it's always a delicate thing to do. It has to be done wisely, and so we don't get a reaction that is not the desired one. Okay, so I think you are probably already familiar. Most of you are on this call who are familiar with surveys. These tools that I've described, you have either used them or heard about them, and they're quite familiar. Now, if we think about those methods that I just spoke about, they leave a gap because they mostly look at a predetermined set of variables and indicators that are known to be crucial for fieldwork monitoring. For example, we monitor the recording of under 5 deaths, for example, is very crucial. We know sometimes there are problems and other kinds of issues. But if you look at, even if I was telling you we used to have about 40 field check tables, 40 field check tables, sorry. Now, there are hundreds of questions in a typical mix or any multi-topic surveys similar to mix. So although these indicators and variables we have chosen for those tools are very important, they just look really at a small proportion of all the variables in the questionnaire. And then it means that we may be missing a lot. We actually, if we use only those methods, we are going to miss something because you would not develop these things for all the variables. It would become very heavy, of course. So, so there's a lot that is left out, and we may end up seeing the problematic issues only during the analysis and reporting phase, where you cannot correct them anymore, right? Or worst even, we may not even see that there has been such and such problems. So this has been a preoccupation for us in the mix team, and we have been thinking about what we can do about that. So we have been looking, how can we look at all the questions, all the variables for all the interviewers during fieldwork? If we do that, almost invariably, we will see popping up unsuspected issues that are not captured in the standard tools that we were talking about. So let me describe to you a bit how we have developed that method. And really the rest of my presentation today will go in detail a bit about this method because it's rather innovative. Actually, I'm not aware that other survey programs are using that method. We have been working on this method for 5-6 years now. We started in the Eastern and Southern African region, and now we are using it more widely. So we are running a statistical test within teams to detect potential interviewer bias. So we run a statistical test. These are mostly chi-square tests on each question. So I'm emphasizing the each question of the questionnaires that we are using in the interviews. And we compare the answer pattern of each interviewer against that of her or his team members jointly. So let me maybe just make sure that we understand here. Suppose you have the team number 3, on which you have interviewer number 31, 32, 33, 34. So for one question, we will test the answer pattern of interviewer, let's say 31, against that of interviewer 32, 33, 34 jointly. Then we will test interviewer 32 against 31 plus 33 plus 34. Then 33 against 31 plus 32 plus 34. And then 34 against 31, 32, and 33 within the team. And this is done over a specified period of time. We most usually find it to have enough data to see how things are going when we are using the most recent 3 weeks of fieldwork. We don't want to use the whole fieldwork. Let's say the fieldwork has been going for 6, 7, 8 weeks, because there might be issues that have been there at the beginning but have been corrected. We want to be able to see that this issue is actually happening now as we are looking at the data. And then when we find a p-value, when we run this, like the statistical test comparing the answer patterns of that interviewer against the rest of her team, if the p-value is at less than 0.001, we record a flag. So you see, this is a level of significance of 1 per 1,000, which is much smaller than what we see in use, mostly in research, which they use a 0.05, 5% level of significance. We use 1 per 1,000, and I will speak a little bit later why we are using this level. And then the results are presented in a graphical form, and we will see example, of course. And for each flag that is recorded, we also record a small statistical table that shows for that specific period, for that specific variable, the answer patterns of the interviewers on that team. So we can analyze what happened. So let me go a little bit into detail, since it's probably something new for many of you who are attending this webinar. So data is collected on tablets. Although we started using the method with the paper questionnaires, but with the lag in the data being recorded, that was not working so well. But now with the tablets, it's really quite working very well and being quite helpful. So we get the data sets, let's say, week after week from what's happening in the field, and you will have a number of data sets, which usually are more in number than the number of questionnaires. For example, the household questionnaire in mix has an HS data set where each observation is a household, but you also have a second data set for the household member, the HL, for household list, isn't it? Where each observation is a household member, and so forth for the other questionnaires. I'm just listing a few here. So we have the survey data sets. So now we are going to list all the modules that are of interest in our analysis. Usually it's all the modules, basically, in which we are interested. For example, here in the household questionnaire, we could have the household characteristic module, the energy use, water sanitation, and washing, etc. Okay. And now within each module, of course, we can pull out all the variables in that module. And at this step, we can leave out some of the variables that are not of interest for this kind of analysis. I'll give you an example. In the household list, for example, there is a field which we call the line number of the mother of the child, which of course, it's not the kind of variable we would want to analyze for this kind of purpose. So we would drop it at this point. But we really analyze particularly, I would say it's 95% of the variables that I believe are being analyzed in general. So we look each variable one by one. We are going to check first if that variable is empty or uniformly filled for all the interviewers in the data set. Because if it's empty or uniform, for empty is empty, of course. Uniform, for example, if all the fields are 1, and there are some of these variables sometime in the data sets, we won't need to make an analysis to see if there's a difference between interviewers because they're all basically the same. But we will drop them, but we will keep a list of those variables, and can be useful sometimes to detect some issues. For example, sometimes there can be some bugs in the CAPI application which could maybe skip a variable by mistake, and you can capture that right at the beginning of fieldwork, hopefully, through this approach. So now, if that variable now is not empty and is not uniform for the interviewers, we are now going to see, is it a string variable or numerical variable? Numerical here, I put a note that we drop the decimals because in this kind of analysis, they are not of concern. So we have string variables and numerical variables. If it's a string variable, we will look now at the length, the maximum length actually at the answers in that variable for all the interviewers. We are really interested in strings of length 1 because this correspond to the questions where you can choose a multiple number of answers. Isn't it? For example, if we have a child with diarrhea and you ask the mother, where did you take the child when he was sick or she was sick? She might say, I took her to the local clinic, but then it didn't improve. I went to the regional hospital. So there might be more than one choice, isn't it? And these usually are coded A, B, C, D, etc. in those systems. So they will be of length 1, isn't it? Just one letter. In a few cases, although with CAPI now it's quite rare, you could have a few fields that have more than, that are longer, basically. String variables are longer. Maybe because these are not clean and anonymized data, you may still have left in the data set that you have been shared with names, for example, of maybe the name of the locality, let's say, or maybe even the name of the respondent sometime, or the comments that was made about a certain variable, a certain answer. Of course, those we will not analyze in this kind of approach. So we will drop those variables that are not of length 1, those string variables that are not of length 1. For those that are of length 1, we will recode numerically, and we will recode the missing value, the empty strings, basically, to 0. And this is very important because I think you will appreciate that we are interested in the answer pattern of each interviewer, but we are also interested in how often a certain individual has skipped a certain variable compared to other interviewers in the same team. So in order to include that skip, which is a string that is empty, basically, we code it as 0. Actually, we do the same for the numerical variables. So now let's see for the numerical variables, you will have mostly in a survey like the mixed categorical variables. For example, let's say, does your house sold as electricity? The answer is yes, no, or possibly don't know. So yes is 1, no is 2, don't know will be 8, isn't it? And these are categories. Basically, you have only 3 choices, isn't it? And we will record the missing to 0 for the same reason I was telling you above. And we, in certain kind of questions, you have also an option other. For example, it could be the material of the roof of the house. Maybe there's a number of possible choice, but what you have in front of you is different. You will record it on, you will put it under other. And this is, there's an interest in, if the pretest has been thoroughly done, there should not be, usually we don't expect more than 5% of other, because you would have already included the answer categories that are relevant for your area. And if and so at this point here, we can assess the percentage of other for each question, and if those that are like above a certain limit, like 5%, we can list them and to call the attention to the teams to see what are those others, and maybe we need to do something about the recoding. And then there are the continuous variables. For example, if I say the weight of the child at birth, it's a continuous variable. It can take so many values, isn't it? And to make the difference, we have used the point of 34 different values. If there are more than 34 different values among all interviewers for that field, we consider the variable continuous. If it's less or equal at 34, we consider this a categorical variable. And if I was doing this webinar in person, I would ask you why 34, and I would be very interested to hear your answers. But let me give you the answer why we have chosen that. Is that we want to be able to capture some of the fields which are recording the days. For example, the day of the birth date, isn't it, of let's say of one of the household member of a child, or maybe the date of a certain vaccine was received. And of course, there might be interviewers that are not careful and they put everything on the first day of the month. Let's say they just record month and year, and for the day they put 1. So we will be able to capture that as a categorical variable. And in some cases, there are special fields. For example, in immunization, when we record the vaccines, the date the vaccine was taken, if, for example, there's no date on the card, but it shows that the vaccine has been given, there's a special code for that. And we want to be able to see interviewers that are using this kind of codes, maybe more than they should, or more than others. So that's why with the number 34, there is the 31 days of the month maximum and 3 special code, let's say. And for the continuous, here we are recording missing to -1, no response to -2, don't know to -3. The reason is this, because on the continuous variables, we are going to use a t-test, but these special codes are usually given very high values. Okay, for example, if it's a 3-digit field, a don't know would be 998. And this might be very high compared to the usual answers outside of don't know. And if we don't want really that, because an interviewer used don't know 2 or 3 times, that it's suddenly shows that this interviewer is using very high numbers, isn't it, compared to others. So we are recoding them to just below 0 so that they don't over-influence the result of the test, but we can still see what's happening. I hope that was clear. Okay, that's for the recoding. Now for the very important step, the key step basically is our statistical test. In the string variable and the categorical variable, it will be a chi-square. and the continuous, it will be a t-test. So let me just explain a bit more on that one. So we are trying to detect highly significant difference between the pattern of answer of one interviewer against that of her teammates jointly for the period of interest, which, as I said, is about 3 weeks. So imagine we have 25 teams of 4 interviewers, and they're all doing, let's say, the household questionnaires. So it will be, isn't it, 100 tests that would be run, one for each interviewer against the rest of her team or his team, isn't it? But that will be 100 tests. If I was to use a level of significance of the test of 0.05, as is often done in research, I would have one false positive in 20 tests, right? Which would be a lot because I will end up doing thousands of those tests every time I do that exercise on the field data. So we don't want, of course, to have lots of false positive. That's for one thing. That's why we chose a level of significance of 0.001, 1 per 1,000, isn't it? And also, we really want to see the difference that are large. We are not really, we don't really want to see the small differences because this may be just expected variations. So this is the way we do it. So now for once we have our p-value from the whatever test we are doing, if it's above 0.001, no flags, we just pass. If it's below 0.001, we record a flag and we record a small table, statistical table, like I was saying, to show what is this flag about. And I'll show you some example in a little while. So we produce, once we have gone through all the set of variables, and you can imagine it can take some time because depending on the number of interviews that you have, the length of your questionnaires, the number of variables, the computer will turn for a while, depending of course, depending of also the speed of the tool you are using. I know for me, the laptop I'm using and the software I'm using, I may wait 15, 20 minutes for all things to be processed, depending on the size of the teams and all. But it's not really that very long, right? We get the result. And then once all the flags that have been recorded, we produce a graph of flags per module. And we produce, I'll show you an example, of course. We have also documents that come out for the flag tables per questionnaire and the flag tables per team. Those are very helpful when we want to, when the supervisors now, especially at central level, will want to see what is the problem, what is happening, what are those questions that are being flagged, in what way are the difference between the interviewers, and can this be explained by something else than a bias? Maybe there's another reason. And then there's also a list that will be produced for the most highly flagged variables. So let me give you an example. So this is a real example from a real survey, victimization module. You see on the y-axis, you have 31 lines, so it's 31 variables. And on the x-axis, you have 14 teams. Within each team, there are 3 or 4 interviewers. Yeah, I think 4 in this 3 or 4 interviewers. Now, when we say 31 variables, it's not necessarily 31 questions because I don't know if from where you are, you can see the shaded description of the questions that are within the graph itself. For example, V1, VT1, VT2, VT3, which VT5, VT6, the first 5 lines, they are all, yes, one question, one variable. But when you get to VT7, which ask this is for people who have been assaulted in the last 3 years, did the assaultant have a weapon? The answer is yes. And was it a knife? Was it a gun? Or was it maybe both of them, isn't it? And then other kind of weapons. So there are A, B, X, and R codes. Each one of those codes will become a variable in this analysis, as it should be, because there are questions that have the option to have multiple answers. So, and if you count these little blue circles within the graph, you will see there are 76 of them. That means in this module, in that survey, at that time of the field work, the most recent 3 weeks, there were 76 flags. So you see, that's just one module of many modules. So it's quite a lot of data that is being generated. And we have to find a way to consume that information without overwhelming everybody. So we are going to look at patterns. So you may already see that there are some flags that are vertically aligned, and some seems to be accumulating horizontally. So let me give you a bit of, we'll go through that together to see what does it mean. So we have maybe 3 very obvious vertical series of flags. And when, like the flags on the left in team 2, you have 6 of them aligned right there in the middle of the graph, right to the left. It means they are all coming from the same interviewer because they are exactly aligned. But if you look at team 9 below, you will see there are 3 set of flags for several of the questions. It means 3 interviewers of the same team got flags for those questions that are being pointed at, which means that not only one interviewer is very different from all the other 2 or 3, but each one is very different from the other, which is a bit more alarming, actually, right? And as I explained earlier, for each flag, there's a small table. So we'll look at one of them. Let's look at for team 2, the first flag on the top. The table is like the one that you are seeing now on your screen. So the flag is for interviewer 21. And this, we are looking at 3 interviewers. So that must be victimization module for the women questionnaire, where we have 3 female interviewers, for example. And you can see right away why the flag came up. Interviewer 21 so the question is, have you been physically attacked in the last 3, I'm trying to remember now, 3 months or 3 years. I think it's 3 years, yes. Have you been physically attacked? And that interviewer has 5 years for 31 interviews that she did. While if you look at 22 and 23 together, they have 74 interviews between the 2 of them, and no yes answer. So nobody has ever been attacked in the last 3 years. So obviously there's something here to be worried about. What's happening? Isn't it why that interviewers at this level of answers and the others don't? And this is the occasion to emphasize the fact that the flag does not necessarily point at an interviewer that is doing wrong. It points at the fact that this interviewer has an answer pattern that is very different from that of her teammates jointly for that question. And it may well be in this case, actually, I'm inclined to think that maybe interviewer 21 is the one that is really doing her job. And maybe the other 2 are kind of going fast on that and not recording or not asking the question very carefully. But of course, we will know only once we approach the team, either in person or by phone. But you can see now that this came up. And we would probably not have been aware of that if it was not for a tool like that, isn't it? And let me go to the next example. Now, let's look again at the same flag we were looking now on line 11. You can see the only person who has a flag is that interviewer 21 for question VT9. There's no other flags on that line. So there's a problem there within that team. And there doesn't seem to be another problem with other teams with respect to that one question. But now when we look at lines 23, 24, that's a totally different picture. This is for questions VT20 and VT21 about feeling safe. We will go a bit into that just now. But you can see that practically all the teams, actually all the team except team 3, have a flag in at least one of these two questions, and often on both questions, and for often more than one of the interviewer. So now it's a very different feeling than what we look at the first case, isn't it? Because now you are thinking maybe the problem is not with the interviewer or with the team. The problem is with the question, probably, or with the training. Something is wrong because across the board, you're having difficulties with that question. So the approach to the teams, once you detect such problem, will be very different. You may even end up having a general call to all the teams to focus on a certain issue. So let me show you an example again for the first flag on the left. So the question is, do you feel safe walking alone in your neighborhood after dark? Okay. And the answer categories are very safe, safe, unsafe, very unsafe, or never walk alone. And we have, as you can see, this is just one of the several flags that we have found. And you can see in that case, it was interviewer 13 that was flagged. Once again, we are not sure who is doing right, who is maybe not doing right, but you can see right away where the problem is that interviewers 11 and 12 have, like, half of their interviews, they record never walk alone in the neighborhood after dark, right? While interviewer 13 has not recorded that option in the last 3 weeks. So there is a different approach to recording these sensors, apparently, because they're working together in the same area. The level of security must be quite comparable. And it's not the only team that has problem. There are many teams that have this problem. So the issue might well be in the way the question or the answer categories have been suggested, isn't it? And I will come to that right a little later. I don't want to spend too much time right now, but we will come back to that point. So what are the assumptions for that last method that I was describing? What are the assumptions that are made and what are the limitations? So first of all, as I said previously, the method assumes that all members of a team work in the same area at the same time. And this is the standard practice, of course, and the recommended practice. But they have seen a case or two, at least, where the teams sometimes are split. For example, not long ago, there was a survey done in a conflict area. And for good or not so good reason, the team leader decided to send one interviewer to a village, another one to another village, another one. So in such circumstances, the method will not, the assumption is not satisfied and the method cannot be reliable, isn't it? But most of the time it works well. It works only also when at least 2 team members administer the same questionnaire, because we have to compare within team, right? So when you come to the man questionnaire, if you have only one male interviewer and all men questionnaire are done by that one interviewer, the method will not apply. Yeah, this is a limitation. I mean, it's not really too bad in the case of mix, because we can see what's happening on the side of the women questionnaire for the same module. Mm-hmm. And if there is a problem, it will probably apply to the men's questionnaire too. But yes, it is a limitation. And then you have another case that if everyone is doing on a team the same mistake on a question, then there will be no flag because they are all doing the same mistake. Maybe it was a mistake during training, or maybe in the perception, or maybe they collided together to say, we are going to record this question that way, isn't it? And then it will not come out. So these are some of the limitations. And then there are some pros and cons. The pros is that we look at all the questions, at all the questionnaire. That's really a very big advantage. We don't look only at suspected problem, we look at all the questions. And it really helps supervisor focus on issues that we know have been causing problems. The cons is that it requires time to analyze and report, yes. You can see the large number of flags that are coming out. It takes also time in the field to document and verify the issues that have been detected. I think here we could probably use more the verification by phone, especially that we are now collecting more and more phone numbers for the possibility to have phone interviews, follow-up interviews in MixPlus. And we have the risk to overwhelm supervisors because it's too much, isn't it? They already have a lot of work. But let me say here that I worked recently with a country with that tool, and they gave us feedback saying, yes, when we got first these reports, wow, we were really completely overwhelmed. But then they said after 2 or 3 reports, like we do a report per week or sometime every 2 weeks, they got the hang of it, if I can say it that way, and they started to see how very useful it is. So yes, these are pros and cons. And let me finish just a few slides to show you now what are we learning about what potentially leads to interviewer bias. The problems can be first with the questions. Maybe the question is not well formulated, maybe it's unclear, maybe it's too complex or too long, or we have a long series of repetitive types of questions. This is what we have noted with these flags and other methods also that the bias is coming. I'll give you an example of a long series of repetitive type of questions. The method used for child discipline. Already the introduction is not that very short. And then you have 11 types of methods of discipline that you are going to ask one by one to that respondent about the child, about her child, isn't it? And really, we see quite a lot of flags in this type of questions. If you even look at the way the child has been hit as a punishment, you will see that it is F, G, I, J, K. 5 different ways of the child being hit. Is it with a bare hand? Is it on the face? Is it on the arm, etc.? So this really tends to create to lead to bias because there's fatigue on the side of the interviewer and of the respondent, and they try to take shortcut eventually. And then sometimes it is the answer categories that are a problem. They can be incomplete. Maybe the customization was not well done to include all categories that are relevant for that country, or some categories are unclear, or the answer category is not a direct answer to the question. We will see that. Or too finely categorized, very often, not so often, more or less often. There are sometimes too many finely defined categories, or potentially difficult to choose from. Let me give you an example of categories that are not a direct answer to the question. And I'm telling you, these 2 questions almost always attract a number of flags. VT20 that we already saw, isn't it, in the flags? How safe do you feel walking alone in your neighborhood after dark? Okay, safe, unsafe, or unsafe, this is a direct answer. But when it comes never walk alone after dark, it's an indirect answer to the question, right? And it does attract the flags. And it would probably, in my opinion, be better to first ask, do you sometimes walk alone after dark in your neighborhood? And if the answer is positive, now how safe do you feel doing that? it would probably work better. And similarly for question WB15, how long have you been continuously living in this town? So the answer is given in years, but there's an option to say always or since birth. Of course, it's implied, the always since birth is implied, but is not the direct answer to the question. And you will see, we see flags on that question quite a lot, especially that if you say always since birth, there's a skip of 2 questions after. And you might have a respondent with 33 and he answers, I've been living here for 30 years. So is it always since birth or not? It would probably be better to first ask, have you always been staying in this town since birth? And if not, then ask for how many years. And then another example for the material of the exterior walls. This is an observation. We often have had problem of interviewer bias on that question. For example, I'll just give a rapid example because I see my time is passing. Bricks and cement. Of course, the bricks are made of cement. And what about the bricks that are covered with cement? We do explain that during training, but you know, it doesn't always register, I think, so well. You have either the bamboo covered with mud and stone covered with mud. What you see is the mud, right? And it's supposed to be an observation. So now you're supposed to basically guess more or less what is behind the mud, right? And you have category 26, reused wood. 36 is wood planks. So if there are wood planks that have been reused, you see the kind of issues. And we often have problem with that, actually, that question. And then finally, I think that's the last slide. They are really interviewers who are not doing their jobs. They don't read the whole question or rephrase incompletely, especially when they have to translate. When the question is in a certain language and the interview is another language, the risk can be quite high. Or some will not even ask the question. They are in a certain area. They just assume that everybody has the similar answer to that question. They record it to go faster. Or some take just shortcuts. They know which questions, if they say no or yes, will lead to a large skip. Et voilà. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you found this interesting, and we will look at your comments and questions. Thank you.
Well, Pierre, thank you very much for recording that webinar, that presentation earlier. So we will now go into the Q&A segment of this webinar. Pierre, I would think that you had a little bit more time than I did to look at the questions that came in, because I was showing my screen and I didn't really canvas the questions.
Yes, actually, I think I answered, because it was pre-recorded, it was very convenient. I could go to the question and answer. I think I answered nearly all of them.
This is a good method. We should use this method in the future webinars too.
And it reduces the stress of the presenter.
Yes. So please go ahead and start answering the questions if you can, and I will start looking at the questions themselves.
Yeah, I have answered, I think, most of the questions that were directed basically to me, but I would like to maybe re-emphasize a bit something that was said in the presentation, and it came up in the question. This is very good question, of course, and some of the participants here were stressing that maybe this is not a bias, maybe the team members are not distributed at random within the cluster, and maybe that's why the answers are different. And this is very true. It's quite possible. So the first thing I want to re-emphasize again, but it was mentioned, is that the flag doesn't mean this is a mistake, okay, or this is a bias. Not automatically. It quite often is, actually, indeed. But it shows that there are differences between interviewer patterns of answers within the same team. And then when we approach the teams with this information, for some of those flags, they will say, this we can explain because it's this and that and that. And that's it. It's explained, and there's no more worry about it. But in the majority of cases, indeed, it will point at some issues that we may not be aware of, and that this will be an opportunity to address these issues. It can be an issue within a team with a specific interviewer, or as I've shown during the presentation, it can be an issue across the board, which is often very important to tackle very early in field work. So yeah, it has been really very useful, but we cannot say that a flag means something is wrong. That is absolutely true. And as one of the colleagues who presented some questions said, if everybody does the same mistake, do answer a certain question wrongly in the team, it will not come up. And this is one of the limitations, as I had spoken already about. So there were a couple of things maybe that I left maybe to Attila to answer. For example, one of the question was about, is DHS and mix comparable, for the other variables comparable? It's not directly related maybe to this presentation, but I'm sure Attila would be happy to answer that. And several of you were asking about getting the PowerPoint of this presentation or the webinar. I will let Archana answer that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre. As you alluded to, yes, I can answer the question. The question is, do you think DHS data and mixed data are perfectly comparable? If yes, what are the precautions we need to take into account? If no, then why? Well, there's a long answer. There's a short answer to this question. I will go with the short answer to the question, saying that the two survey programs and the data that they produce are perfectly comparable would be a little bit of a stretch, I would think. However, approaching the answer to this question from a positive side, yes, there's the mixed program and DHS program in terms of the methodologies, in terms of the approach in the technical details of the survey, as well as the data produced. They are probably very close to each other. There are some aspects of survey implementation which are almost identical, but there are issues which are quite different from one to the other. When it comes to the content, there's about a 60% overlap between the two programs, but there's a large amount of data which is produced by Mix. Basically, Mix is a child-centric survey program. So therefore, the focus and the core of the questionnaires and the data that we collect are based on children. In fact, there is a webinar coming up in 2-3 weeks that we are going to be taking up some aspects of this comparability between the two programs. So I would recommend that you follow the webinar announcements and join that webinar to learn more about some of the differences of DHS and mixed data. And that is going to be mostly about the way that the coverage of children in the two respective survey programs are handled. So a short answer, because it's sort of not completely related to Pierre's presentation, so I didn't want to take too much time on that. There's a question, Pierre, I think I saw, which is about sharing or training supervisors and others during the field on this as part of the mixed training. And what would you say to that?
it is. We have been recommending that not only for this tool, but for all the tools about following up on data quality during fieldwork. In many cases during the training, we reserve some time for the supervisors to go over these tools and to become familiar with them. And even if it has not been done, let's say, very thoroughly during training, as we start using these tools, we will have a conversation with the NSO, usually colleagues who are looking at this data. And we look at it together, we have calls. And as I was saying in my presentation, often at the beginning, the colleagues find, oh, this is a lot of things to digest. And it is true, it is. But after a few iterations, I really have had very positive feedback from the colleagues saying this is so useful. We are thinking even of using this for other of our surveys and all. So the point is that, yeah, if we use only standard fixed approach tools, we are going to miss some of the issues that are quite, that are specific for different surveys. So it has been found to be very useful. So I hope I answered the question. Attila, you want to add to it? Or?
No, not much to add. Thank you very much, Pierre. There are some other questions that I wanted to cover. When a mistake is spotted in the data, is there any guidance on when to correct the data or not?
Good question.
Yes.
No,
that's
but,
why I asked it.
That's why you sent it back to me.
Yes.
So truly, it's a collaborative enterprise within the team, isn't it? There is the national colleagues who are there in the field who know much better about their survey than we at the regional or higher level can know about. So it's an exchange. We have calls together, and then there are things that are very obvious. For example, in one survey recently, we saw that the CAPI, there was something in the CAPI that was skipping a question, isn't it? So this, you have to correct it right away, isn't it, as soon as possible. In other cases, especially when you have this series of flags that are becoming horizontally, which shows that there's a problem there's misunderstanding somewhere a bit very generally amongst the interviewers. So it's often a matter of making sure that we understand what the problem is, where it's coming from, and then the teams are reached out, phone or WhatsApp group or what, to say, please be aware of this and this issue. If in such and such situation, make sure that the answer is recorded in this or that way. So you have to adapt to what you find. In some cases, we just see that, okay, that question is giving some problem. We may not be able to fix it. Maybe in the future, we will try to see how to better approach these questions in order to get better results. So not everything can be solved right away. It has to be a conversation and see what we can do without also creating a lot of too much weight on the teams. We have to see what is realistic to do. I think that's what I could say on that.
Thank you, Pierre. Another question or comment is about using audio recordings during interviews to spot interviewers, for instance, who are not performing well, who are not reading the questions, who are not really asking the questions, etc. Basically using audio recording. during interviews as a way to check the quality of the interviewer's work. What
I'm
would you say
leaving
to
that
that?
to you to answer.
What would you say as a researcher?
Ah, well, you have a question of ethics. That's the first point, isn't it? You would have to tell your interviewers, your respondent, actually, that we are recording this interview, isn't it? And yeah, it's, what I would say is that we can develop many tools to try to squeeze interviewers or force them to do the right thing. But interviewers are very clever also. Uh, we have to get a balance of so that we do a good training, we create a good relationship with our teams. We have to try to put some level of trust in the quality of the work they do. The teams have to sense that we are looking at what's happening. We are not trying to punish people, but we are trying to get a good survey. And in a few cases, of course, you will have to get rid of some interviewers who are really messing up with things. The question has come about, yes, you can do many things. You can take pictures, you can take recording, you can follow to the tablet, maybe the exact location of the interviewer, how long that interviewer is passing in the household. I mean, how much police work do we want to do? It's a very large question. Maybe Attila wants to say something else.
Well, of course, there's that, of course, and there's various other ways that we can actually look into the performance of the interviewers or the questions for that matter. Of course, there might be audio recordings, but there are issues to do with that in terms of ethics and others, logistical issues too. In terms of that, there's spot checks that supervisors and interviewers would do. We would have interviewers together with supervisors conducting an interview so that the supervisor can actually coach the interviewer later for their performance. We can do re-interviews. There are various things that can be done, but each of them have logistical implications. Each of them have practical implications too. So rather than we always think of the best way to do training and the best way to organize the fieldwork to get the best out of the interviewers to begin with. And if we have failed, if we have shortcomings on either of those, then we have potentially a lot of problems. And the audio recording of the interviews, for instance, if you have gone through a very bad training session, is not going to work well. It's not going to tell you much, or is not going to be something that you would be using to really improve, because what's been done during training has been done. So all of these different methods of approach can be used, but I think the core of it is actually good training, good fieldwork monitoring, and good fieldwork organization. As Pierre, you have mentioned, and I have a question on that which I had received previously, which I will talk about. You look at teams to basically run these analyses, which is very important. But let's not forget that in many household surveys, there are no teams collecting the data. There are still lots of household surveys, not mixed, of course, not DHS, but there are still a lot of household surveys where the questionnaires are handed to individual interviewers, and they're given addresses to go to, and they do the interviews not within a team, but singularly, or maybe with another interviewer, two interviewers, and they bring back the questionnaires, which becomes almost impossible to do this kind of analysis and to monitor data quality. I was going to ask, is it always possible to detect, to identify teams within the survey data afterwards? For instance, in cases, of course, you have been involved from the beginning. Of course, you would have an influence on the survey managers to use the right codes for the interview so that you can easily distinguish from one team from the other. But is it always the case especially if you are getting involved in a survey which has been completed and you still want to do this analysis and look at issues? There's an interviewer code in all the data sets, and that has to be arranged, I would assume, in a certain way so as to be able to detect or identify the teams individually.
Yeah, no, there has been, we have done a few retrospective analysis, as you know, and in some cases, some surveys we were not able to use. But there are very few because of this issue that you could not really figure out where the teams were, which interviewer were part of which team. But in mix, and those are very few in mix now, especially nowadays, you always have the code of the supervisor and the codes for the team members. And I usually run tables to make sure that if I see one interviewer is across 3 or 4 teams, then I see, okay, something is not adding up. And I try to figure out. Sometimes it's just a glitch and some wrong coding. In a few cases, then you can sort that out. But when it's very messy, then what to do? Of course, if you're using it during field work, then you can get information from the national colleagues. They will tell you this one is on this team, this one is on that team, and you can record. But in general, it's very in the mix, which is the where I've been working. This is usually very, very clear and systematic, and this is why this approach is working quite easy. It's quite easy to use this approach. Yeah.
Thanks, Pierre. I just want to mention that as a big program, we use several ways to look at data quality, both during fieldwork as well as after fieldwork. This is one of them, and this is probably the most innovative way that we are looking at data quality during fieldwork and monitoring the quality of fieldwork in general. But there are field check tables, as Pierre also talked about. There's the actual organization of the way that we do fieldwork with the supervisor, with the interviewers, with several protocols in place to make sure that we have possibilities of improving the data which is being collected. In addition to all these, of course, we have data quality analyses that we do after we have completed the fieldwork too, because and especially at that, of course, we have a large number of data sets from different countries that we can bring them together and do a comparative analysis and look at things which are common patterns across countries too. So one of the things that we had looked at one point, and I'm sure you remember this, Pierre, was the way that the fieldwork was actually completed in terms of the speed with which it was completed. There are some surveys, there are some fieldwork which is completed too fast. There are those sometimes which take a long time to complete, and both extremes have issues. In terms of this analysis, I was going to ask if the fieldwork is conducted too fast, does that actually lessen your chances of detecting these problems? Because there's a time that needs to be spent on doing these analyses, but there's also needs to be time to look at these analyses and come up with conclusions from them, and then provide feedback to the teams as well. So if the fieldwork is too fast, what happens?
Yeah, it's an excellent point. Maybe in terms of detecting the problem, it can even be done after the survey, right? But the problem will be in correcting whatever issues that you may find. So I would say you can start with this. I'm referring to this the last tool that I was speaking quite a lot about, the flags, isn't it? Is that you need about 3 weeks of fieldwork data to start getting a grasp on things. So if you have a survey, let's say that lasts 4 or 5 weeks and is finished, by the time you have a look at the data, the interviews are already wrapping up, and and you don't have time, you will get a sense maybe of which variables may be having some issues, but it will not give you a chance to go back to the team and try to correct, to orient the data collection so that the data quality is better. So yeah, the duration, I would say less than, at the very least, 6 weeks of field work in order to be able to use a method like this with some level of success. 2 months is quite comfortable already. Yeah.
There's actually a question about this, which was also going through my mind. Unless I have missed, I don't think you have mentioned which programming language you use for all of this.
Did I mention I'm using Stata? My syntax is all in Stata. It's the tool I'm comfortable with. I actually don't think I mentioned in the presentation.
Probably not, unless I have missed. Yeah.
No, I
And
didn't
then
mention.
I was wondering if such analyses would be possible using some of the other software. For instance, the one that the mixed program uses more than others is SPSS, and I wonder if there has been any attempts to convert this programming in SPSS, and whether SPSS would be sufficient to create such analysis.
I don't pretend to be an expert of SPSS, not at all. But what I could, the bit that I know, it seems that Stata seems to have more graphic capabilities than SPSS, graphic flexibility. And as you can see, we rely a lot on graphics for this analysis. So I think it would be challenging, but now that it's possible to do Python code even in SPSS, so maybe I cannot really answer that question. I have a feeling that a program like R maybe might be more close to what Stata is doing in this case. Yeah, but it's a bit out of my comfort zone to answer that question.
Sure. So one of the requirements of this to work, of course, if data is collected and quite in a fast manner, it gets to the cloud and everything can be accessed. So in surveys where there's no access and none of this is possible, of course, it will be a foregone conclusion to look at these results and then try to improve them in the fieldwork. So another aspect, in addition to the speed with which the fieldwork is conducted, is also access to data. It is really important to provide access to the data so that these kinds of analysis can be done. Would you agree?
Yes, that's very true. But I must say that, I don't know if I should say surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, nowadays in surveys I've been accompanying in the last, let's say, 2-3 years, it doesn't seem to be a major problem. You might have a few teams that have that problem. They are working in remote areas, and you will see in the data that you don't have recent data for those teams. So that will limit, of course, the scope of the review. Some of the teams may not benefit, let's say, from this look into the very recent data. But in general, it has not been a major issue. You might have a delay. Instead of looking at the last 3 weeks, you may look at the last 3 weeks, except the very recent one, which is still incomplete. So it continues to be very useful, even when it's not there's not a perfect sharing of data on. It's recommended on a daily basis, right? But if at least it's shared once a week, if the teams know that on Monday this analysis is going to be run, and they will make an effort, let's say the day before to go somewhere where they can share that data, then it works. Yeah.
Bo Peterson, who is another household survey expert on our team, is reminding us that we have the same programming in R as well. Just to mention that before we finish.
I don't think, Attila, sorry, Attila, I don't think it's for the whole, I don't think, I've not seen for the flags. I've seen for the first, those are where I was showing by week of field work. Yes, I know that some colleagues have already put that into R. The syntax for the flags, I have not seen. I would be very happy to see it if it exists.
Okay. Thanks, Pierre. We are on time. We have run out of time. So I would like to thank you once again for this great presentation and hand over to Archana to wrap up. And I personally look forward to seeing you all in the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Attila, and thank you, Pierre, for the excellent presentation, and all of you for your participation and your great questions and comments. A reminder that the next webinar will take place in 2 weeks on May 22nd, and it's entitled Results of the 2024 Assessment of Standard Mixed Content and Questionnaire Architecture. So hope you'll be able to join us for that. A final reminder, the recordings will become available shortly on the Mix YouTube channel and the internal UNICEF SharePoint site. So with that, we wish you a very good rest of the day or evening. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.